I'm Jon Berghoff. I invite organizations and communities to shape their own future. Today on Dov Baron's Leadership Show, we talk about purpose, creating collective purpose. We talk about the three most important questions managers can ask, and we talk about a strength-based approach to creating systemic change.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. I'm your host, Dov Baron, founder of Full Monty Leadership. I'm here to assist you in tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, in your life, and in your leadership. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives out of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to take an insider look at leading systemic change. If you're a new listener, new viewer to the show, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in, we're about to go full Monty. And if you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners. And of course, we're extremely grateful to Inc.com for citing us as the #1 podcast to listen to make you a better leader. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Listen, there are over 1 million podcasts out there, thousands of them focused on business and leadership, but there is only one show that focuses on the heart and soul of business and leadership, and you're tuned into it right now. Remember, we always need your help staying relevant, so please get yourself over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, whether you're a CEO, someone in the C-suite, sales leader, entrepreneurial leader, any capacity, we all know there is a diametrically opposed forces in leadership today. There's that old school command and control that is not going to let go of the reins without a serious fight. And then there's the next gen leaders who see leadership as something more than just profit, something far more meaningful. The question is, how do we lead the systemic change that needs to take place, that embraces deeper purpose, creates meaningful work for our employees and ourselves, and at the same time staying healthy economically? Well, stay tuned because you're about to find out. Our guest today is Jon Berghoff. Now, Jon has been referred to by CEOs as the collective intelligence whisperer. Jon leads some of the most complex large group collaborations in the world, from bringing together 700 citizens of a city of Cleveland to design a sustainable future for the city to a global forum for business. He's considered as an agent of world benefit, the co-founder and Flourishing Leadership Institute, FLI. Jon and his team are now on a mission to train, certify others in FLI approach to bringing out the best in human systems. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Jon Berghoff.
Thanks,
and the crowd goes wild, young man.
Oh man, I wish I could start every day with that kind of intro.
You can. When it comes out, just play the recording.
I might do that. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you here, Jon. Thanks for joining us, my man.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate it very much.
So let's start right in what I talked about in the intro. What is the Flourishing Leadership Institute? How is that different than God knows what leadership group? Because there's plenty of them who are offering certification, and some of them are spectacular, some not so much. What is the Flourishing Leadership Institute?
Sure, yeah, and I appreciate that observation there. Even the name itself causes strife for me, and we may or may not get into that. I'm going to answer it with a question, which is really what we're driven by, and we're driven by a simple question, which is, what is it that allows or enables any human system, and that's a term or a phrase that encapsulates a group of people of any type, a team, a community, family, a division, an organization, even an entire city or a region like Northeast Ohio. And we're driven by a question, which is, what is it that allows a human system to be at its very best more naturally, faster, and maybe more effectively than it ever has been? And our expression of what we learned is through a couple different approaches that we bring into different communities. But I don't mind telling you, we got a lot more questions than answers, and that's our primary question: what allows us to bring out our best at the level of a whole system?
So there's a lot of focus on people, leaders, strengths, but this is bigger. I mean, I think that's very important, don't get me wrong, but this is talking about systems and communities and even countries. How do we bring those two things together? Because it seems like, on the grand scale, it is the system and it is the community or whatever it might be. And on the much smaller scale, it is the individual. And oftentimes people see that as diametrically opposed. I got to find my strengths, and I can put those to the good of the community. But the good of the community is more important than I am. And so that means I got to chop wood, carry water. You know what I mean? So
yes,
talk to us about how those two things come together without minimizing one or the other.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll speak from my personal experience. I grew up, my first professional experience was in sales. And one of the things that I appreciated in the company and the environment that I was brought up in is I was introduced to this idea that me learning how to, in a self-determined way, to empower myself, to become my best self, to be purpose-driven, to have a vision, and to achieve, that allowed me, fortunately, to have a certain level of success early on. And then as my career developed, I eventually landed in a spot where I was now responsible for others who were in that position, right? In a traditional sense, a leadership role. It was actually with the Vitamix Corporation, most notably when I now was responsible to help others to have that experience. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I became very interested in at that point in my career was understanding how a collective community or a system of people can shape its future together.
Right.
And it wasn't in replacement of me having my own individual ambitions or members of our team, family, or community having their own individual ambitions. But the question that I was struck by was, how do those work together? How does my purpose and the purpose of a community that I'm a part of, do they have harmony? Can one support the other? And so that was my discovery was they don't have to be in conflict. They can be in conflict, but they don't have to be. And
right.
and good things can happen when we see that they can work together.
But oftentimes they are seen very differently. I mean, like the work we do in my organization is we help companies to find their purpose, not some horseshit mission statement, but actual real soulful purpose. And one of the things we say is we can't do that without either the founders or the CEO or whoever's the big guys in charge, big gals in charge, meaning that those top level, we work with the top level individuals in that organization. And we're able to show them the alignment of personal purpose because we're not anywhere by accident and what's the resonance of who we are. But when you're talking on a scale of a city, I mean, I'm working with 9 executives and it's juggling cats, not even herding cats, it's juggling cats. When you come to the context of a city or a massive community, help us understand what your process or some of your process around that, because it seems massive.
Yeah, happy to. And I want to start by just acknowledging the point you just made about this relationship between personal purpose and collective purpose. One of my dear friends, and she was a colleague while I was at Vitamix and is someone who I still consider her a mentor today, is a woman by the name of Jody Berg. She's the CEO of the Vitamix Corporation, and happens to be the 4th generation of a family-owned business. It's been around since 1921. In and of itself is a fantastic story.
Sure.
Well, one of the things that Jody has become passionate about in the last several years is the exact conversation that you and I are having, which is, what is the relationship and the role between employees having their own individual purpose and a company having a collective purpose? And one of the things, she's so passionate about this, she went back to Case Western Reserve to get a doctorate degree that I believe she just completed to study this rigorously. And one of the things that she found, and she just shared this with us at a meeting a couple months ago, is that they can empirically point to this realization that when within a community, individuals have their own individual sense of purpose, and there's a collective, that we're all better off versus hoping or assuming or projecting that we can have one big purpose that everybody will get behind without honoring that they ought to have their own individual purpose. So I just wanted to call attention to that's a conversation that it's not only with Jody, but with CEOs every day that they're curious about. To answer your follow-on question, how do we generate a shared or collective sense of purpose across a team, a division, an organization, a whole system? And the answer, the way we do it is scalable at any size. And the answer on one hand is powerfully simple. You would think it could be complicated with 500 people, but it's simple. It all comes down to understanding, first of all, what is the question that we're asking that is leading to the conversation that we want to invite people to have, that will then ultimately enable them to have a dialogue, an authentic dialogue that allows to emerge from those conversations an answer to that question of what might be our shared sense of purpose. And let me give you just I really prefer to make this super practical. So I want to give you a really practical example. I walked into a meeting yesterday with 8 executives. This is a much more common example that we can all relate to. 8 people sitting in the room. Yeah. And I was there to facilitate a multi-day collaboration. And I realized that if we got right down to business, or what I would call the left brain conversation, down to business, and I, for my benefit, and they, for their benefit, didn't stop and ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? We might miss a deeper meaning. And so here's a practical example. We will almost universally, I can't say never, but almost universally, we'll start every convening that we facilitate in our organization with partners or wherever we're at by asking the question, why are we here? Why does this matter? And then in a very practical way, actually inviting everybody to answer it and then seeing across our answers, what are the themes or patterns that emerge? And what's beautiful about that is it's not me, the consultant, it's not the CEO saying, here's why we're here. It's the members of the community generating their own awareness of where their answer to why are we here, why do we matter, whether it's this meeting, this project, our division, our organization, at whatever scale they want to ask that, when they see their own answers, their own themes, all of a sudden they realize, wow, number one, there was a lot to this that we've now made explicit, which is a big deal. Number two, we've seen that where we actually have connection points, commonalities amongst why we're here, and we can honor the unique differences to our answers too. Now we can move forward, but from a place where whatever we talk about next is grounded in the community's answer to why this is important, which is so much more valuable than me as a consultant or one person saying, here's why this matters. So hopefully that's a bit of a practical answer to how do you do this at the scale of a system? And if you have 100 or 500 people in a room, it just becomes a geometric kind of math equation to how you roll up their themes so you can emerge all at once. What is our common purpose?
Yeah, it's fascinating because, as I said, in the work that we do a lot of work around resonance and quantum resonance fields. And that was what I wrote my dissertation on, and how that we're not in any place by mistake. And so if I'm working in this organization, there's an alignment at some level. Now, and what we talk about, and this is my philosophy, it's not the truth, it's my philosophy. And my philosophy is very simple, that the reason we go into business, the reason we go into leadership, the reason we go into do what we go to do is to reconcile our own soul, to bring ourselves back to a state of wholeness. And what that means is I'm going to pull myself in, or I'm going to get pulled into environments that will challenge that or facilitate that, and not much in the middle. So I'm at this organization and I'm hanging out for the money, but shit, this is the wrong place. This so doesn't help me. Or I'm in exactly the right place, because now that I've dug below those levels, which is what you're talking about and I talk about, is like, oh my God, I was beginning to hate this job, but now I realize this is what they're really about. That's what I'm on fire about. And you get people engaged and committed and willing. So I love what you're doing at that bigger scale. And I think it's so vitally important because within a system like that, you have multiple leaders, and we've done that too inside of a company. You got divisional leaders, which is again a smaller version of a town, or it's a fabulous thing. So I want to first of all congratulate you in saying all that. I don't want to bring it back to that left side for a minute and just be the cynical bastard that is listening, and that is, a lot of what you talk about is spiritual intelligence. Becoming aware of our higher values and deeper meaning and self-evolution. And meanwhile, the left brain leader watching, listening is going, oh, more of that bloody woo-woo stuff.
Yeah.
How do you answer that?
Yeah. Well, it's a rational question, and it's an important question.
Sure.
It's an important question. I think one of the things that we've seen is that in the modern workplace, there's a kind of a macro level paradigm, and maybe it's unconscious. Maybe it's coming from a place of fear. Maybe it's born in our roots of needing to be efficient. And if you look at management theory and management practice and how it's taught going back 100 years, I think his name was Frederick Taylor, who really is credited for a lot of this. The Scientific Theory of Management, 1911, I think is when he wrote his book. Yeah. That work is still driving a lot of us, like my age. I don't know who he is. I didn't study his work.
No.
But I'm a product of generations that was the way we were all taught to manage, is to get down to business, to be efficient. And there's a time and a place, his time and his place, 1911, where in the birth of the industrial age, that made all the sense in the world.
Well, it's like the education system of today. I mean, it was a fabulous educational system at the birth of the industrial age. Doesn't particularly work today, and these management rules are pretty much the same. They're beautiful, magnificent for a time that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, and all we have to do, if someone's listening to this saying, okay, we're stuck in an old paradigm, I would jump right in and say, well, let's also look at the evidence. Let's look at the data, right? It doesn't matter which poll you look at. The Gallup poll is the one most people look at.
Right.
Their most recent State of the U.S. Workplace study, which everyone can go download it. It's free. It's been updated last couple of years. It's 8 out of 10 people don't enjoy going to work. There was another study of equal or greater size done in Europe and every other country, and it's about the same thing. 85% of people there's no meaning. They don't feel cared for. You write about that in your book about being fiercely loyal. And so the evidence suggests as managers, we need to, or leaders in a traditional sense, those of us that have a title or a role or influence or ownership, we need to be willing to say, hey, how do we shift that so that people voluntarily do want to bring their best selves to work? And one of the things that we know is that some of these right brain conversations, like you said, in fact, the phrase spiritual intelligence, I learned that from Dana Zohar, who takes an evidence-based perspective and says, hey, we have to learn how to have some of these right brain conversations because they actually make us more effective at the left brain conversation.
Absolutely.
And there's some really smart research that's come from Richard Boyatzis, who's a professor not far from here over at Case Western Reserve, the Weatherhead School of Management. And he's considered today to be one of the leading thinkers in the area of emotional intelligence. His Coursera course is free, and I don't know, 500,000 people have listened to it or watched it in the last year. But he's doing some research right now with MRI imaging. They've been doing this for a couple of years, where they look and they realize that our brains, we are not very effective at having a left brain and a right brain conversation at the same time. One of the implications of what he's seeing is that if we walk into a meeting and we have a get down to business kind of attitude, and we get down to the logical, analytical discussion, and my guess is many of our listeners have experienced this firsthand, if we get too quickly into that left brain, it is very difficult, if even possible at all, to go back into what we might call a right brain or a relational conversation, right? A creative conversation where we're connecting to a sense of value, purpose, or our own evolution. So what we're seeing is, hey, if we start on the right side, if we actually start with questions like, why are we here, or where are we going, or what do we value, we actually unlock the other part of our brain. So when we do get down to business, we're actually going to be better at it. And we've also connected to these essential questions that people are starting to value a little bit more.
Yeah, I I think it's what you're doing is great, and I'm loving the research that's coming out. I wrote about Dana Zohar almost 17 years ago, and her research was just fabulous stuff. And it was out to lunch for people, But now there's a growing momentum of this kind of research and showing people. But at the same time, as I said before, the old, we work with companies, and sometimes we go in and the founder is there, or the older CEO who's, the days of CEOs quitting at 60 are done. They're sticking around to 70 and 75 years old. And with them is management theory, is, the command and control. They're not going to let go of the reins. And they really don't, to be quite honest, give a crap about the new research, because their bottom line, and I hear this all the time, is, well, listen, you can tell me all the research you like, but here's the evidence. What we've done has worked. We are now 500 million a year. We're $1 billion a year. We're 100 million a year, whatever it might be. So when you talk to me about these new things, it's very easy for them to pass it off as a theory or as a trend or as something that's just passing by. How do you address that kind of response, even though you've got all the research?
Yeah. Well, the reality is I can't predict the future.
No.
And for all I know, what got them to where they are will be just fine. For all I know, what got them there will be great for their future. One of the things that we all see, clear as day, is that in any one of many industries, we're living in a time of a lot of change.
Mm-hmm.
And if someone's listening to this and they're in an industry that has never faced any change, then it could very well be that however they got to where they're at might be great moving into the future. Maybe it won't. I don't know. I don't know that to be true. What I do know is that when we meet leaders who are facing changes that they don't have an answer to, that they realize they're in an unprecedented time and place, that either one of several things is going to happen. They're either going to hold on to old ways of being and knowing, and somebody like me is not going to be worth their time to talk with.
No.
And I have to learn to accept that. And that might be the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or they might realize, okay, something here needs to change. And they might realize, okay, we have to figure out how to strategically renew ourselves at a much faster pace. And they might be asking questions like, well, how do we do that? Or how do we actually invite innovation to come from everywhere if I'm now willing to acknowledge I don't have the answers, right? How do we actually get people to want to bring their best selves to work? If leaders are asking those questions, and those are the three questions that I believe Gary Hamel, who wrote a wonderful book called The Future of Management. He also, I could be wrong on this, but I believe he is one of, if not the most widely read authors of Harvard Business Review, contributors.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about those three questions as, potentially the agenda for managers of the future. So when a manager is willing to ask those questions, how do we strategically renew at a faster rate? Look at a company like Google.
Yeah.
And I know it's easy to say, well, they're in the tech space, but as soon as we throw everything they do out because of that, we miss the wisdom. And the founders of Google, they were recently asked the question, what's most important to you? And I would have expected maybe a more traditional answer, like, well, it's our competitive advantage at any given, our competitive advantage. And their answer was the opposite. They said, well, it's not our competitive advantage. They said it's what we call our evolutionary advantage over time, not our competitive advantage right now, but it's how well are we able to adapt, and not just adapt in the face of crisis, but can we learn to adapt proactively in positive ways to capture and create new opportunities. So if a leader is sensing that they need or want to adapt, they'll be interested in having a cup of tea with somebody like me. But if not, I'm not a great conversation.
Now, you hosted this event with 400 plus leaders, CEOs, NGOs, etc., from 35 countries, designing solutions to achieve sustainable development goals and you did that through Case Western University.
Yes.
How did that come about? Because, they randomly, let's look in the phone book and see who might be able to do this.
Yeah. Well, I have a huge place in my heart permanently for Case Western Reserve. I'm an alumni of their executive MBA program, and I was influenced quite significantly by a number of their thought leaders. Chris Laszlo, who's written extensively on sustainability, and really he's the director of a research institute called the Fowler Center for Business as an Agent of World Benefit. And between Chris and one of his colleagues, David Cooperrider, who David is the gentleman who, along with Ron Fry and a number of their peers going back 30 years, they created a methodology for enabling positive changes at the level of a system called Appreciative Inquiry. And Appreciative Inquiry, if you want, I can give you the backstory on that, but the short answer to how I got invited to play a role in supporting that global forum is Appreciative Inquiry. They've been using that methodology to bring together business leaders, government leaders, and interested stakeholders. They've been doing this going back 12 years before I was involved. And it started originally as a global forum to figure out, how do we enable businesses to solve the biggest problems, to resolve the biggest opportunities in the world? And this was their fourth global forum. And it just so happened that here at FLI, our primary work that we're doing is designing and facilitating large-scale collaborations using their methodology. I did not invent it. We may have a few innovations on it, but in close partnership with Case, we've been using their large-scale change approach. And so I was just very fortunate that these mentors of mine, who I've now had a chance to work with, invited us to join them in designing and then ultimately facilitating this global forum, which, you're exactly right. We had 400 folks from 30 plus countries, I believe. We had from students and professors to really progressive business leaders. Right. And it's interesting to note, too, this conversation, Dov, that you and I have had for the past 10 minutes about kind of an old way of thinking and being amongst leaders. I see a world, and obviously I have a skewed lens because these are the folks that get attracted and I get attracted too. But I see a world of leaders coming from industries where you would never expect it. From mining companies to shipbuilding companies. A company out of the Pacific Northwest and up in Alaska, Vigor, they're a shipbuilding company. And yet their CEO at that event stands up and says to the entire audience that what he sees is a future where, as an example, feminine values help future leaders. This is the CEO of a shipbuilding company.
About as yang as you could possibly get, making a yin statement. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah. And then one of his peers stands up and says, we're at this conference right now because we want to design a workplace where when people come to work, it's like it is almost the equivalent of a meditation retreat, right? And they actually now have individuals who they have helped, who may have been previously convicted, who are now not only functioning in society as employees at their shipbuilding yards, they're actually leading lunchtime meditation sessions for other workers. Yeah. So I see examples like that, and it gives me a sense of hope.
I want to meet those CEOs.
Yeah, they're one of many that we meet that are really seeing a whole new way and a whole new reason for why we go to work.
That's absolutely fantastic. You say we need social technologies to become a priority, that management innovation has lagged dramatically behind every other type of innovation. And you even go so far as to say you feel like we're sort of stuck in the dark ages around it. Tell us what you mean by that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I grew up, I was born in Cupertino, California, and I was fortunate to have the experience. Both my parents worked full time, really hard in the technology space. My parents met at Intel in the 70s. And so as a kid, I, even without intellectually kind of understanding what was going on, growing up in the Bay Area, I really had a sense and appreciation for this kind of pioneering spirit, right? And this willingness to take risk. And people work their tails off. Those are qualities I would use to describe my parents and some of the things I learned from them. And part of the benefit to humanity that part of the world has helped to create is, these devices as an example, right? And we all know in our own way, through our own experience, that technology has been and is continually innovating. And if we look at all of human history as a snapshot in time, it's really only been in like a blink of an eye
Absolutely.
that this stuff has come about, and it's radically transformed our way of living, right? And I'm going to quote, I believe his name is Astro Teller, and I believe he's the head of the Google X project. And you're probably familiar, but he's commonly quoted, hopefully accurately quoted, first pointing out that if you look at the rate of change of technological advancement, it is potentially, we might be at a time in human history where the rate at which technology is changing has surpassed the ability for human beings to adapt to change.
Yes.
And so I ask, is that true? Could it be true? What are all the implications of that? And for all of the good that all of our technological advances have created, I've met a lot of people who would also agree that as digitally connected as we are, there's an argument that we have never felt more disconnected. And I see this in myself. Let me be really clear. I'm not somebody preaching this who's figured this out. I see myself every day having to try and become a little more conscious of how I'm allowing technology to be a distraction for me. And it's not just about technology, but that's just a great example. But you asked about, your question was social technology. So I really think that when that's just a great anecdote to help make a point. But when you go back to the point that management itself has had very little innovation, the way that we manage, the way that we invite a community of people to shape their future. And this, I believe, comes from Gary Hamel's research, where he talks about if you look back 70 years and you scan all the leading business publications and you look at terms like technology or technical innovations, you'll find literally 30, 40, 50,000 articles, something like that. If you look at process innovation, operational innovation across all of the leading business publications and journals, you find 3,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 articles that have been written. If you search management innovation, managerial innovation, the number of publications in these leading journals, it's literally a few hundred. And you look at that and you realize we really have not innovated or evolved. How do we invite communities, groups of people to shape their own future? And the nice thing is there's actually a lot of great work that has been done in this area going back several decades. And part of our mission at FLI is just to try and lift up that work, because we're seeing a time and a place where the receptivity to it is bigger than we feel it has been in a while.
Tell us, because, I started out with this. Tell us about FLI. What is the LEAF certification? What is that about?
Yeah, so
because it is different, right?
It sure is. Yeah. So our LEAF certification it's currently a training that we're offering to clients and coaches and facilitators to be able to bring our social technology into whatever space they want. So a little backstory on our social technology. It's certainly not mine. It actually started 35 years ago when a young PhD student by the name of David Cooperrider was getting his PhD in probably organizational development at Case Western Reserve University. And he was brought into the Cleveland Clinic. This was, I think, early 80s. And he was asked to do a traditional consulting project. And David, in a very intuitive way, looked at how most consulting was done. And most consulting was, and it still works this way, was based on looking for problems. What's wrong, what's broken, what's missing, what's not working. And he had this intuitive curiosity. He thought, well, the questions that we ask ourselves are fateful. In other words, like I'm wearing contact lenses right now. Just as a metaphor, Dove, the moment I put these contacts in, they change how I see the world.
Absolutely.
David felt that the questions that we ask both individually and systemically they change what we see, what we look for, and eventually what we can create. Absolutely. And so he was, I believe, way ahead of his time. And many agree with that when he said, well, what if we did this? Instead of going into the clinic and just finding problems, what if we looked at what was working when we've been at our best? What if we looked at when we are at our best? And then we also ask questions like, what could it look like for us to be at our best? And we ask those questions by inviting as many voices as possible. Let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. So that eventually led to an approach to leading positive change that is now, it's called Appreciative Inquiry. Appreciative Inquiry. Yeah. And fast forwarding 35 years, Appreciative Inquiry has been used all around the world. In fact, David, he went out of his way to enable Appreciative Inquiry to be available as a publicly owned concept. It can't be protected by anybody. I met David my first week on the job at the Vitamix Corporation, where I was brought in. I don't mind admitting now, enough time has passed. I was in some ways in over my head. I had a huge responsibility. Right. And I met him. We had hired him to bring Appreciative Inquiry into the company. And about an hour into a 2-day workshop, I realized this approach of including the wholeness of the system to tackle our biggest opportunities, solve our biggest problems, to ask better questions. I thought this is how I got to do whatever I'm going to do. In the next 4 years, we had a great experience. I eventually left Vitamix because I thought if I could just help bring this methodology out to the world in a slightly bigger way, I thought that could be a big contribution of mine. And so at FLI, for the last 2.5, 3 years, we've been delivering Appreciative Inquiry work into communities of all types and sizes, for different reasons. Sometimes it might be to create a strategic vision where how do we actually include as many voices from our system as possible in creating that strategic vision? So that way there's buy-in. It might feel inefficient up front, but wow, the execution is like the speed of imagination when the folks that need to execute were part of the discussion up front. Or sometimes we're brought in to help. How do we just create or generate a shared sense of purpose so that people both collectively and individually have deeper meaning in their work? Sometimes it's a very specific strategic opportunity, but the approach that we use is called Appreciative Inquiry. And I want to say one more thing about it, Dov, that's a big deal. From the very beginning, David had an intuition, and he thought, if people have conversations that put them in, let's just call it a positive state of mind. Right. And we now know from incredible researchers like Barbara Fredrickson, Carol Dweck, whose books line the bookshelves of every airport bookstore you find. We now know that evidence in the data is so strong that when we have conversations, instead of what's broken or what's missing, that start with when have we been at our best and why, and how do we duplicate or expand that? When are we at our best? How do we do more of that? What could it look like to be at our best? And any other question that moves us productively from a place of strength, we now know that opens up our intellectual capacity, whether it's broadening and building our ability to see opportunities, to innovate, to create all these buzzwords. There's actually a neurological basis that says from a certain state, it's not just happiness when we hear the word positive, but it's optimistic, it's looking forward, it's an openness, it's a presence, it's any of these ways of being that we're a lot smarter. We connect better with each other. And so David was ahead of his time in realizing that, hey, if we ask those types of questions, it's not only going to generate maybe better answers, but maybe the reason why is because it strengthens our well-being as people. And so our LEAF certification, we're just teaching others how to do this now because the demand has surpassed our ability as a small team to deliver on it.
So are they people coming to take it? Are they consultants, coaches, CEOs? What kind of people are taking this training?
Yeah, every label you just gave. And it's often teams, it's often consultants. But the commonality of who we're meeting through this work and who we're meeting right now is surprising me exponentially. We have coming to our next class, we have a professor from a university in Dubai. We have a woman who works in organizational development in Belgium. We have a woman who wants to bring this into her local communities in the UK. We have a team coming from Portugal who they're actually a consulting company that is bringing the best of technology into the best of large-scale collaborations. We've got a woman in Australia who leads a community of women entrepreneurs. So it's very diverse in terms of who we're attracting, at least on the surface.
Sure.
The commonality is the values, is they're realizing, hey, we might be moving in a direction where learning how to design and facilitate and invite the kinds of conversations at the scale of a group. It's no longer just about, and this will always be important, one-on-one conversations, but so much of what happens today in the working world and in communities of all types is you have groups of people coming together. Yeah. So how do we optimize that experience to bring out the best so that community can actually start to shape its future in an effective way?
Yeah, I think what you're doing is not only powerful but vitally important, and it's a different way of looking at it. I know that in the work we do around purpose, I was originally trained in psychology, and as a therapist, you're looking for what's wrong. And yes. It's a discipline to go to look for what's right and to look for commonality. But, I went on to do many other things, including quantum physics and other stuff, and really began to understand, like I said, resonance and how resonance works, and saying, hold on a sec, there are things that are coming together for a reason. And sometimes they come for a reason to bond us and grow us, and sometimes they come to a reason to catalyze us apart so that we reveal ourselves. And so I've been through some shit, but sometimes going through shit is like that's the revelation, that's the catalyst for breaking you open and revealing why you're in the crappy shitty job to get you to stop repeating going into crappy shitty jobs and actually go do something for yourself or go work for the company that your alignment of your purpose. But the challenge is, and I would like to hear what you have to say about this, the challenge is often that I don't know that most people have the courage to look for true purpose. They some of them are getting braver now and they're going, okay, I need to go a little bit below mission, and I've read Simon Sinek's It Starts With Why.
Yes.
But that's not your purpose. That's your why. Your purpose is deeper than that. And getting people to go to that level, because when they come together collectively in that level, there is fire. There is fuego. They're like, let's make this happen, because there is this bigger piece. And I love that you're pushing in that direction or inviting in that direction with the kind of inquiry, the kind of questioning that you're doing. It's important. Who is a leader presently that you look at in the world doing what they're doing that you see as doing it differently and that you admire?
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a great question. I appreciate that. And so I'm going to answer that, and I want to come back to what you just said about purpose.
Yeah.
I'll give you one example. A gentleman by the name of Lyle Clarke. And Lyle Clarke, and I'm just becoming familiar with the history of his company, Clarke. They are in the pesticide business, right? Their focus is in mosquito control, and they also help municipalities and publicly owned and probably privately owned land with water maintenance. Right. So this is an industry that immediately you're not thinking of stories like the Googles and the Facebooks, right? Well, Lyle Clarke, I've come to learn about 10 years ago or so, he had a personal transformation where he began to ask himself, why do we go to work every day? Is it just so that we can kill as many mosquitoes as possible, or is there something more to this? And what his journey led him to is realizing that the purpose for him and for his company was so much more than just, let's kill as many mosquitoes as we can to make as much money as we can. And that eventually led to him choosing to really open himself intellectually, but also to open himself, what I would call opening his heart.
Right.
To seeing that the purpose of his organization, yes, let's say it is to kill a lot of mosquitoes, but even more importantly than that is to create a workplace where when people come to work, they go home better off as human beings, because that's going to change their families, that's going to change their communities, and everything outside of that. He also came to realize that, wait a minute, we're in the chemical business. Should we also be asking about how we do business and what impact is that going to make on our planet?
Wow.
And so they asked some really hard questions.
Of course, particularly in that industry.
Yeah, exactly. And then he asked himself, well, okay, let's assume I don't have the answers. How do we create the best place to work where we're also actually having a positive impact on the planet? And let's see what ends up happening. And so Lyle started inviting his entire community to come together. And when I say community, their organization, they'd put all of their employees in a room. They did this for the first time. I think it was back in 2011 or 12. I could have the year wrong. And they asked everybody, what kind of future do we want to create? How do we do this in a way where we're actually making a positive impact on the planet, a positive impact in our communities, and the business continues to thrive? You can't do it without the business thriving. And fast forward to today, they have developed a reputation. They've won awards for the work they're doing in sustainability. They've transformed, maybe not all of, but a large majority of their products to be completely organic.
Wow.
Their employees designed a brand new headquarters that brought nature into the building to where there's natural light coming into every room, to where the building itself is actually regenerative, not only through solar panels, but through how they're managing the land around it. And the list of what Clarke has done, it goes on and on and on and on. It started with kind of a micro transformation within Lyle, but they now are so concerned about the well-being of their people, the future of the planet, and the punchline that people want to know, yeah, they're thriving as an organization.
But you said something there that I think is so important and rarely paid attention to. I believe that the genuine shift in an organization is invariably catalyzed by the transformation of an individual. There's somebody in that company who goes, something's off. Something's not right. Something needs to matter more. Something needs to be differently focused. And it's that internal questioning, that what some would form as a come to Jesus moment, that moment of deep personal questioning. And if you do that inside an organization and you're at the top, you can transform an organization. If you're not at the top, you can transform a department. And if you can't transform where you are, then go transform something else. Because your transformation is the catalyst to transform. It is not just for you. Again, back to what I was saying about that we go into business, we go into leadership to reconcile our soul, to bring ourselves back to wholeness. But that reconciliation is to catalyze that in others. And it's my deep belief, we were talking about it before we went on air, that an awakening for me, many of my viewers and listeners know, I'm not sure if you do, John, but I fell off a mountain in 1990, got smashed to pieces. It was a complete devastation of everything I know about my life. And people think that changed my life. It didn't. It was later, when things could have become normal. That's when things change. And it was and it wasn't, and I realized then I had to put my life on purpose. But it wasn't until 5 years later that I had the evidence. Because I went back into speaking and teaching and all those things. And at the end of a 3-day program, this lady stood in front of me and very gracious and said, "Thank you." And I said, "For what?" Specifically, for what? Because people are very gracious, particularly in Canada. And I said, "For what?" And she paused. It was wonderful. And she said, "For my grandchildren." And I said, "You don't look old enough to have grandchildren." She says, "I'm not." She goes, "Well, that's my daughter over there. She was in the training with me. You've transformed our relationship by connecting us to our deep greatness, for helping us to find our purpose. You've transformed the relationship we have. She just got married and they intend to have children, and that will transform my relationship with my grandchildren." And it was in that moment that I realized I was living my life on purpose, because it's about transforming the lives of the people who will never know my name. I don't expect that grandchild to know my name. I don't care if they know my name. But if I do the work with that intention, and it's that awakening that you're talking about, that personal awakening is so vital. And I find that people are often quite afraid of going to that place. But it is where everything, as Campbell talks about, it is the dark cave. It is the place that most of us are afraid to walk into, but it is the place where your true treasure is built and buried, and you can go claim it. What's one thing that you did for a long time that you likely thought was good that transformed you, that maybe blocked you, that you were doing, and blocked you from the kind of success that you wanted to have, that catalyzed that kind of shift? What were you doing that just didn't work, but you thought it was good?
Well, I'll take the last part of your question there.
Yeah.
What have I done that thought worked but wasn't good? And the very simple answer would be anytime I think I knew something or understood it, that confidence was probably getting in the way of a deeper knowing.
Right.
And I've been very fortunate to have some big screw ups, but maybe even more important is some mentors who've helped me to recognize what humility is. And I feel like I'm still trying to understand really what it is. But a part of it is being open, not only intellectually. I think that's the easy part.
Sure.
Although everything's easier to say on a podcast than it is to do, but being open to seeing the world differently.
Yes.
And being open, what I said earlier, through the heart, which is the willingness to see the world through somebody else's eyes,
yes,
to empathize with others, and there's a whole framework for this that I came across long after I was thinking about what I'm talking about, called Theory U, and it comes out of some really great folks at MIT,
mm-hmm.
where they've spent a lot of time with transformational leaders and organizations that have transformed, and they have a construct for what is it that allows us to get so present that we can actually connect to the future as it's trying to emerge, which that sounds like an otherworldly idea, but part of their construct, Theory U they call it, has to do with opening the mind, opening the heart, so that we're eventually open to what is seeking to emerge. And I can say that and it sounds nice. I don't believe I understand everything about how to do it. I will say, Dove, that one of the things that has worked for me is to have, and I'm going to use a phrase that I learned from somebody I really admire, Dr. Chris Laszlo, called practices of connectedness. And for me, it might be meditation. It might be spending time in nature. It might be yoga. It could be being with my kids,
yes,
because for me, meditation can be a living practice.
Absolutely.
But I think that I have a feeling that these practices of connectedness, which we all have to come up with our own that uniquely fit us, help us to get to that place where we better connect with ourselves, with others, with nature, and whatever is kind of seeking to emerge.
Yeah, that's fabulous, mate. You know, we're coming close to the end, and I want to ask you about something that I think is a challenge for people. You know, you're a very successful individual. You've done amazing things, and you continue to do amazing things. But that, one of my guests talked about, he did a book about destruction and the importance of destruction, and the power of positive destruction. And he talked about the price of doing business, and that we do a lot of things in life where we think, well, this is just the price of doing business. We just sort of accept it as the foregone conclusion. And as entrepreneurs and business people, we kind of do that around our family lives. We feel like the price of doing business is, I do work 70, 80 hours a week. I do work 100 hours a week. I don't have as much time with my kids as somebody in a job. You've worked very hard at having a relationship, having family, and being successful. Help us understand how you've done that, because of the viewers and listeners who have maybe been conditioned with management theory and what it means to get to the top.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate and thank you for asking that, because my family is of the ultimate importance to me, Dove. And for everything I can say I've done really well, I've got an equally longer list of things where I still screw up every day. So let me make it clear. I'm not a marriage counselor expert or parenting expert, but I was fortunate that one of my many midlife crises that I try and instigate as often as I can, where I question, what do I value, and am I really aligned with those? One of those experiences was about 3 or 4 years ago, where my oldest was 4 years old, and he's now 8, and My middle child was probably 2, and we had a newborn. Mm-hmm. And that same year, we had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a newborn. I was in the middle of a career transition, and I made a huge leap of faith. We sold our home and moved to another community, literally overnight. And so I literally, you used the word destruction. I destructed all of my safety networks.
Right.
And I did that because I had a combination of events that caused me to really question, what do I really value? I have a dear friend by the name of Jon Berghoff, who he wrote a book called The Front Row Factor. And it's a book where he tells stories of life lessons that he's learned by helping people who are fighting for their lives. He started a wish organization 12 years ago called the Front Row Foundation. They help children and adults who are facing life-threatening illnesses to sit in the front row of the event of their dreams. And after 12 years, he wrote a book about what has he learned helping people who are facing the end.
Wow.
And he talks so much about getting clear on what we really value and who we are. And that kind of influence caused me to really question that. And one of the things it led to is me realizing that the most important legacy for me that I believe I want to leave is going to be through my kids. And so I've worked really hard. I've said no to so many opportunities. A gentleman I admire, Jim Shields, who teaches families how to connect with their kids. One of the things he's taught me, I'll never forget the phrase, is Jim said how important it was when he learned that he needs to consciously make decisions where sometimes he will have a voice in his head that says, the business needs to suffer. In other words, I'm okay knowing I'm making a decision that will cause the business to suffer. Now, years later, I've learned to realize that in the short term, it appears to suffer. But in the long term, for me, what it does for my well-being and my fulfillment, in the harmony that it creates by making short-term decisions that serve my family, that in the short term look like they're hurting my professional career, it seems that my business takes off the more I remove effort from it and put it into the things that fill me up the most. So I've been fortunate to I spent a lot of time with my kids. Last Friday, awesome. I took my son out of school. I said, we're going to have Jim, who taught us this. It's called a board meeting, a family board meeting, yep. Where once a quarter, I take my son or my daughter, my 3-year-old, we'll do our first board meeting next year. And they design the day or a half day. There's no digital devices. And the only rule is we're together. We're not disconnected from each other through these devices, which in today's age is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, we're going to reflect on the moments that we enjoyed most from that time together. I just had one with my son on Friday. I took him out of school, right, into the school of life, and we went to a water park. And at the end of the night, I left it up to him. I said, what do you want to do right now? We could stay up watching a movie, or we could do something else. And he said, Dad, what if we made a gift for Mom and Sierra and Kaizen, his brother and sister? And he and I went through our family photos on my laptop, and we created a photo album with 180 pictures that we're going to give to them as a gift. And he and I had that moment of connection that we could have so easily done something else that evening, but instead it enriched my relationship with him, our relationship with our family. And I try and create moments like that, Dov, that when I'm at the end of my last breath, I'm going to be happy I did that. Yeah. Instead of staying at work that night.
That's beautiful, man. That is beautiful. We have got to finish. We're right at the very end here, and I just want you to quickly tell us if there's one thing that you want our leaders who are watching and listening to go do, if there's an action they could take in the next 24 hours or even as many as 7 days, if you could design one thing you'd say that you would ask them to go do, what would be that one practical thing based on what you've shared?
All right, I got 2 that are fighting, so I'll keep them.
So let's have I got 2 quick ones.
One is I would say go into nature. Go be in nature. If you want to journal, if you want to run, if you want to reflect, invite the deeper wisdom that nature might have for us. Number 2 would be to go say thank you to somebody who maybe you've never thanked. And I think the power of thanking individuals who have touched us it's great for them and it's great for us. So find a way and a place to acknowledge or thank somebody.
Those are great messages. I particularly like the one around gratitude. I'm a big fan of gratitude, but one of the things I would like to say here, I have a quote around it, but go show gratitude to somebody, love and compassion to somebody who doesn't appear to deserve it, and then go show it to somebody you don't think needs it. And I think that last one is the most important. And I'll tell you why. Because before we went to the air, for those of you listening, before we went on air, John was telling me about one of our shows that we had done with Professor Ed Hess, and how he loved the show and he's sharing it with his people. And I said, have you let Ed know? And the answer was no.
Yeah, no.
And I didn't know. And and now that you told me that that's part of the part of your certification program, like that lights me on fire. But it may look like I don't need to know that. It may look like, well, Dove's got millions of people and people are listening from all over. Yeah, but none of it matters if nobody's ever telling me it matters. And so it may not appear that somebody needs your gratitude. They may seem like they're on top of the world. It's interesting, when I speak, how many people who are complete strangers will come up and tell me that they loved it. And the people who've seen me speak lots of times will come up and go, yeah, it was great. And they figure I don't need it from them. But I do. I want to hear it from them. And it's not about fill me up. It's understanding that we're, particularly those who are on purpose, we also need to know that it's making impact. So go share your gratitude with somebody who doesn't appear to need it is vitally important. Thank you so much, John. This has been great, mate. I really appreciate it. It's clear to me that what you're doing is making a massive difference. And I really hope and pray that you will continue to do that and make that difference, not only in business, not only in leadership, but of course in your family. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you, your organization, what it is you do, and how to tap into your resources.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Dove. And it's been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you,
they could visit me at Lead to Flourish. Lead, L-E-A-D, the number 2, Flourish, FLOURISH.com. Or, of course, they could become friends with me on Facebook.
There you go. And we will, of course, share that link and the URLs with you in all of our posts around this. Keep your eyes open for more great shows. I want to thank John for being with us today, for being part of this. This is vitally important. And again, I encourage you to not just listen in the background. I know that's what you do, but go back and listen. I promise you there is a ton of great material in here that if you blink, you'll miss it. So listen a few times, take some notes, and take some great action. And go do what John said. Maybe show some gratitude to some folks. That would really be powerful. And get yourself out in nature. And as John said, find the wisdom of nature. And remember that research consistently shows that some of the biggest challenges facing the most successful companies are somewhat counterintuitive, in that these fast-growing companies hit a point where they realize they're spending a fortune attracting, training, and developing talent, only to have them leave them at an alarming rate. If you're sick of investing in training and developing your talent, only to have them leave you before you have a return on your investment, then come and talk to us at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide you with the essential leadership skills to rekindle and amplify the hidden loyalty assets inside of your organization by tapping you into your purpose. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get you and your organization to the top and keep you there. Why? Well, because you can't outsource authenticity. And please remember to get yourself over to matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. It's your Matrix self-assessment tool. It's valued at $197. It's yours absolutely free. Just go to Matrix. You don't need the www. Just matrix.fullmontyleadership.com. My name is Dov Barron. I'm the founder of Full Monty Leadership, and I am here to assist you in tapping into your deep greatness so that you can reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can invest in real change by asking the kinds of questions that lift your people up and have them discover how we can come together and be, all of us, at our very best. Till next time, this is Dov Barron, and I am out.